The next step in our journey is the scenario when I want to join an organization but as a different role. There are two roles in our system where you can join, is user or publisher. So let's add another button, join as user and join as publisher. But wait, we don't have database schema for that database structure. Currently we have users role ID. And now we need to add that role to the organization, and specifically to organization user table in here. So I can belong as a user to a separate organizations, to several organizations, but with different roles. So we need to add a column here called role ID. And let's do exactly that. Make migration, add role ID to organization user table. Okay, table role ID default 1. So everyone will default to simple user. Okay, so this is a database field. Now let's migrate it. Refresh our table and we should see 1 here. Okay. Now we need to add that field, specify that in belongs to many relationship in here. In addition to those parameters, we need to specify with pivot. With pivot, and we need to specify additional columns. In our case, it will be just one column, role ID. And this will allow us to attach an organization and specify role ID. So let's do exactly that. Join blade will have additional parameter. Join as, let's make it a drop down actually. Join as name role ID option value 1 will be simple user and option value 2 should be publisher. In real life scenario, it should be inside of the invitation, so new users should not be able to choose their role, but for the simplicity of this course, I will make it choosable in a drop-down. So let's join organization ID 4, join a simple user or a publisher. And then whenever I'm joining, store organization attach, and second parameter is an array. Role ID will be equal request input role ID, like this. So let's change to publisher and try to join. Logged in, and let's see the value. As you can see, I am now with two organizations but with different roles. But we didn't change anything in the checking of the role, so whether I'm publisher or not. And we check that by role ID. And let's leave that as role ID, but let's override that. Similar how we've done with organization ID. On the top, let's do public function get role ID attribute. And we check if there is a session with organization role ID, then we return it. So return organization role ID. Otherwise, we should return this role ID. Otherwise, we should return this attributes role ID. Now, how do we set up organization role ID? It's on the same page as we join organization. So in here, we will add organization role ID will be organization pivot table pivot role ID. You can read more about many-to-many and pivot tables in the official Laravel documentation. So that's when I'm joining organization. And also we need to change that whenever I change the organization, we need to query that organization role ID. So role ID would be db table We don't have eloquent model for that, so organization user, where organization ID equals organization ID, where user ID equals auth ID. First, actually let's put a role, and then organization role ID equals role ID. Let's make it more readable. Let's make it more readable. So this, then this, and this, and probably this. And now if I'm changing the organization, I am a publisher in that organization. Oh, actually I messed up the role. Role ID 2 is admin, not publisher. So in join blade, this should be 3. Pretty expensive mistake. So we need to change the role ID to 3 in pivot table. And now let's redirect back one organization and another organization. And also we need to change a global scope in article model and remove the publisher. So publisher needs to filter only their own organization articles. Now it's good. So we have 3 articles in one organization and 1 article in another organization, but the difference is here I'm a publisher. So if I edit the article, I see the published checkbox. But if I change to another organization, I click edit, I should not see that published checkbox. So that was the whole point of having different roles in different organizations.